You know that saying, you never really know someone until they show you who they are. Yeah, well, I learned that the hard way, flat on the ground with bruised ribs and a shattered illusion of the life I thought I had built. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No screaming, no big argument. Just a shove into a doorframe and the quiet click of my husband's phone as he scrolled through Instagram, unmoved. That's when I realized I was alone. Not just in that room, but in my marriage, in my home, in every sense that matters. My name is Lena, I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last 9 years playing the role of the perfect wife. I was the dependable one, the provider, the problem solver, the human wallet. My husband, Bryce, hasn't held down a real job since year 3 of our marriage. And somehow, that never stopped him from demanding top-shelf liquor, designer sneakers, and the latest phone upgrades. I paid for all of it. Including our house, which was entirely under my name. But the real kicker. I also supported his mother, Dolores. Dolores is the kind of woman who believes suffering builds character, so long as it's not her own. She moved in with us, temporarily, after Bryce's dad passed. That was 6 years ago. Since then, she'd done nothing but criticize my cooking, micromanage my cleaning, and treat our house like her personal castle. I tried to be kind. I really did. Bought her groceries, covered her medical co-pays, even gave her an allowance each month. But kindness to people like Dolores is just fuel for entitlement. That I still remember the morning everything broke. Dolores came into the kitchen wearing her pink silk robe and holding a coffee mug like a queen demanding tribute. I need $3,500 for a new refrigerator, she said without a hint of irony. One of those 4-door French things. With an ice maker, of course. I blinked at her, setting down my spoon. Did the current one break? No, she replied with a shrug. But the shelves are too low. It's hard on my back. I'd spent the night before doing freelance tax returns to cover our mortgage. I hadn't slept. My spine ached. My eyes stung. Something inside me cracked. I can't do that, Dolores, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm already covering everything as it is. If you want a luxury appliance, you'll need to buy it yourself. She looked stunned. As if I had slapped her. Then her face darkened. You ungrateful little bitch, she hissed. After all I've done for this family, and before I could step back, she shoved me. Hard. I slammed into the doorframe, my ribs lighting up in pain. I gasped and slid to the floor, stunned more by the betrayal than the blow. Bryce sat in the living room, no more than 10 feet away. He didn't even flinch. Didn't look up from his phone. You gonna do something? I croaked, clutching my side. That he shrugged. Don't provoke her then. That was it. That was the moment I knew, I could die right there on the floor, and neither of them would care. In fact, they might even complain about the mess that I got up slowly. My ribs screamed in protest, but I didn't cry. I walked past them both, into the bathroom, and locked the door. I turned on the shower, not to clean up, but to muffle the sound of my breathing as I stared at myself in the mirror. There were bruises already blooming along my ribs. My eyes looked hollow. Like a woman halfway gone. That I stood there for nearly an hour. Thinking about the 10,000 small compromises that had led to this moment. The dinners I cooked with a smile. The vacations I paid for that I wasn't even invited to enjoy. The nights I sat up worrying about bills while Bryce snored beside me. The way Dolores laughed when I cried watching sad movies and called me soft. No more. That I waited until the house was quiet. Bryce and Dolores had gone out, probably to lunch on my dime. I went into the home office, opened the file cabinet, and pulled out every document I had. The mortgage in my name. The bank statements. The receipts. I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop and started logging everything. Every cent I'd spent. Every month of utilities. Every dollar of credit card debt I'd absorbed. By the time they got back, I was sitting in the bedroom, door locked, ribs wrapped with an ace bandage I'd found in the back of the closet. Bryce knocked once, then walked away. No questions asked. They had no idea that something inside me had shifted. That the woman who cooked and cleaned and paid and prayed for things to get better. She was gone. That I went to bed early that night. Dolores was yelling about something. I think I forgot to buy her specific brand of cereal. Bryce laughed. I stared at the ceiling, listening. Memorizing the sound. Because I knew I'd never hear it again once I left. That I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But I had resolve. And for the first time in nearly a decade, I felt something close to hope. Not for my marriage. Not for them, for me. The bruises on my ribs faded before the fear did. But even as I wrapped myself in silence and gauze, something fierce had started growing inside me. It wasn't rage, not exactly. It was resolve. Cold, clean, and undeniable. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to act. That Monday morning, I stood outside the office building for nearly 10 minutes, trying to summon the courage to go inside. The nameplate on the door read, Camille Everett, Family and Civil Law. I'd found her name through a women's support group online. They said she was tough. No nonsense. A fighter. That's exactly what I needed. I sat across from Camille in her small but neat office, trying to keep my voice steady. But the second she asked, "Tell me what's going on, Lena," the dam broke. Everything poured out. The finances. The mortgage. The years of emotional warfare disguised as marriage. And finally, Dolores's shove, the physical assault that jolted me awake. Camille didn't interrupt. She didn't take notes. She just listened, with eyes that didn't pity me. They calculated. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "You're done carrying these people." My throat tightened, but I nodded. I don't want revenge. I just want my life back. Then we start today, she said. And we did. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Camille got the ball rolling fast. She reviewed every document I brought her, bank statements, tax returns, loan paperwork, and confirmed what I'd suspected. The house was legally mine. Bryce had never signed onto the deed, and I'd paid every single mortgage payment. Alone. She prepared eviction notices for both Bryce and Dolores. She also helped me file a civil suit, for $22,000 in damages. It covered years of unpaid rent, utility costs, food expenses, and even medical bills I'd paid for Dolores. Every number had a receipt. Every lie had a timestamp. Camille's eyes gleamed when she read my spreadsheet. "You were keeping a record this detailed?" I shrugged. At first it was just so I wouldn't forget. Then I knew this day would come. I moved out quietly. Found a small apartment across town, a one-bedroom walk-up with squeaky floors and an old heater. But it was clean. It was mine. The air smelled like pine cleaner instead of stale perfume and cheap beer. I left behind the big house I'd worked so hard to buy. Not because I was giving it up, but because I was taking it back. On my terms. Camille instructed me to gather more evidence. So I did. I combed through my phone, downloading every text message where Bryce casually asked for money, until his check cleared. I saved voice messages from Dolores, demanding groceries or yelling at me for forgetting to wash her bedsheets in lavender detergent. I took screenshots of Bryce's online orders, chargers, speakers, and sneakers all billed to my card. There were days when I questioned myself. When I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should have tried harder to keep the peace. But those thoughts didn't last long. Not when I replayed the voicemail from Dolores calling me an ungrateful parasite. Not when I saw Bryce post a picture of himself at a bar, tagging his location as my kingdom. Not when Camille reminded me, abuse doesn't have to leave bruises to be real. And you have bruises too. Remember that. I kept to myself during those first few weeks. No TV. No calls. Just silence, interrupted by the clack of my laptop keys as I built my case. Piece by piece, I stacked the evidence like bricks in a wall. Every time I added another file, I felt less afraid. I was still nervous about what would happen next. Bryce had always been dismissive, but not violent. Dolores? She had a temper. I knew confronting them would be ugly. But I was no longer scared of ugly. I was scared of going back to that bathroom floor, clutching my ribs while the people I supported turned their backs. I reached out to my old friend Celia, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. We used to grab coffee after yoga class, before Bryce made me feel guilty for spending so much time on frivolous crap. She picked up on the second ring, and when I told her everything, she didn't hesitate. You want company on the day you serve them? She asked. I think I'll have Camille with me, I said. Good. But I'll be 5 minutes away, just in case. And Lena? Yeah. You're doing the bravest thing I've ever seen. That night, I made tea, sat on the floor of my new apartment, and lit a candle. Not because I was being spiritual, but because it reminded me of warmth. Of care. Of light in the dark. The eviction papers were in a manila folder on the counter. The lawsuit was ready to be filed. Camille had scheduled a sheriff's officer to accompany us when we served the documents. There was no backing down now. I stared at the flame for a long time, feeling the heat on my face. I wasn't just walking away from Bryce and Dolores. I was walking toward something. Toward myself. I'd imagined this moment 100 different ways. Sometimes I pictured myself yelling, sometimes crying, sometimes running away. But when the day came, the real day, I didn't do any of that. I stood still. Solid. Like stone. Camille parked the car 2 houses down from mine, well, ours, on the surface, but legally mine alone. I hadn't been back since I moved out. Even from the sidewalk, the place looked wrong. Dolores had installed those gaudy solar lights in the yard, and Bryce had strung some kind of sports banner across the porch railing. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a squatter's den wrapped in false entitlement. You ready? Camille asked, straightening her blazer. She held the folder that contained both the eviction papers and the lawsuit. As I'll ever be, I replied, my voice calm. We walked together up the front steps. I'd worn neutral colors, nothing flashy, nothing weak. Just dark jeans, clean boots, and a tan wool coat that made me feel like someone who mattered. Camille knocked. A pause. Then the door creaked open, and there they were, Bryce and Dolores, side by side. Dolores had curlers in her hair and a coffee mug in her hand. Bryce wore his usual smug grin, like he'd just rolled out of bed after another day of doing absolutely nothing. Oh, look who decided to visit, Dolores said, her tone already thick with sarcasm. Bryce smirked. Lena. You miss us or what? Camille stepped forward. Actually, we're here to serve you both with formal eviction notices. And this, she held up another paper, is a civil lawsuit for financial damages totaling $22,000. You can't be serious, Bryce stammered. Eviction? You're evicting your own family. You're not my family, I said, meeting his eyes. You're tenants who have overstayed your welcome. Dolores stepped forward, finger raised like a weapon. You ungrateful little bitch. We built this life with you. No, I replied evenly. I built it. You just lived in it. She lunged forward, but Camille blocked her. I'd think very carefully before you touch anyone again, Camille warned, calm as ever. You assaulted my client once already. There are officers en route. They'll be here any minute. Bryce ran a hand through his hair. Look, Lena, let's not blow this out of proportion. We can talk, right? We're all adults. You had your chance to talk when your mother shoved me into a doorframe, I said. You looked up from your phone for 3 seconds and told me not to provoke her. That was a misunderstanding, he muttered, now glancing nervously down the driveway. No, I said. That was clarity. We didn't have to wait long. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, and 2 officers got out, walking toward us with calm authority. Bryce stepped back into the living room, suddenly small. Dolores turned red, her mouth moving faster than her brain. You can't do this, she shrieked. This is my home. I've lived here for years. You'll regret this, Lena. You hear me? You'll regret it. One of the officers stepped beside Camille and addressed them both. You've been served legal notice. You have 30 days to vacate the property. Any interference or harassment will result in immediate legal consequences. Dolores screamed something unintelligible and stormed back inside. Bryce stayed frozen in the doorway. You think this is gonna make you feel better? He asked, eyes wide and voice rising. You think kicking us out is going to fix your life? No, I said, staring directly at him. But it's going to fix my peace. He opened his mouth again, but I didn't let him speak. Family doesn't bleed you dry, I said. They build you up. I turned and walked down the steps with Camille beside me, the officers watching from the porch. The wind picked up, and I let it hit my face. It was cold. Sharp. But it felt good. It felt real. As we reached the sidewalk, Camille placed a hand on my shoulder. You did it. Yeah, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I really did. We got back into her car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. Let them stand there and figure out where they'd go next. Let them scream and scheme and tell whatever story they needed to tell themselves. That chapter was closed. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not just the absence of yelling, or the clatter of Dolores's heels, or Bryce's video games blaring from the living room, but a deeper, richer kind of silence. The kind that fills a space with peace instead of dread. After the 30-day period passed and they were officially gone, I stood in the middle of my living room, and took a deep breath. The air felt lighter. Like the house had been holding its breath for years and was finally exhaling. The locks were the first thing to go. I called a locksmith that same afternoon, watched him change out every bolt, every keyhole. Starting fresh, he asked with a knowing look. I just nodded. Then I painted. The beige walls that Dolores insisted made the house look dignified were replaced with warm golds, soft greens, even a deep terracotta in the kitchen that made the morning light look like firelight. I filled the corners with plants, ones that thrived in sun and didn't need constant tending, just like I was learning to do. I tore down every family photo that included Bryce and replaced them with prints of wildflowers, oceans, things that made me feel something. The couch went to the curb. So did Dolores's antique hutch. I replaced them with second-hand pieces I found at a funky thrift store run by a woman named Marcy who wore glitter eyeliner and gave discounts to anyone escaping a bad relationship. You're not starting over, she told me. You're starting right. Word got out fast. Old friends started reaching out, Celia, of course, but also Jenny from book club, even Ruth from HR, who I hadn't spoken to outside work in years. They came over with bottles of wine, candles, succulents, and hugs that lasted too long to be casual. They all said the same thing in different ways, we're so glad you're out. At first, I braced myself for judgment. For the awkward silences. But none of it came. Instead, they treated me like someone who had done something brave. Someone worth admiring. That alone was almost too much to process. Camille kept everything on track with quiet efficiency. The lawsuit was moving forward, painstakingly, methodically. She was a force, and I trusted her completely. When we met to review updates, she always made time for small talk, a real conversation. "This is the part where you breathe," she told me once. "You've already done the heavy lifting." I didn't realize how true that was until the text started coming. Bryce's number popped up first. Just a simple, "Hey." Then a longer one, "I miss you. Maybe we should talk." I blocked him. Then came Dolores's voicemail. I recognized the fake sweet tone immediately. "Hi Lena, it's Dolores. I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I ever made you feel unsupported. We were under a lot of stress, and maybe things got tense. Anyway, if there's any way we can mend things." I deleted it halfway through. There was nothing to mend. Only a future to protect. I started rising early, before the sun, just to have time to sit with myself. I'd unroll a yoga mat on the porch and stretch as the sky turned from purple to pink. It wasn't about fitness. It was about stillness. About reminding myself that I was here. I was alive. I was healing. In the afternoons, I began sketching again. I'd taken art classes in college, once dreamed of illustrating children's books. Life had steered me elsewhere, but the joy hadn't disappeared. It had just been buried under bills and obligations and bruises. Now I let myself draw again, loose pencil lines that turned into gardens, stars, soft-eyed people in flowing robes. It didn't matter if they were good. They were mine. One evening, Celia stopped by and found me lying on the floor, surrounded by drawings. "You look like you're in the middle of a rebirth," she said with a grin. "I think I am." We ate takeout Thai on the rug, flipping through my sketches and listening to Fleetwood Mac. Celia raised a toast with her plastic cup of wine. "To starting right," she said. I clinked my cup against hers. "To finally putting myself first. For so long, I'd been defined by what I gave. The meals, the money, the constant bending to accommodate others. But now, I was learning how to live without shrinking. How to take up space. How to sit in a room alone and feel safe instead of lonely. I didn't need validation anymore. Not from Bryce. Not from Dolores. Not even from the people who loved me. I had something better now. I had myself. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Isn't that always how it goes? You live inside something for so long, its walls, its history, its weight, and you forget how it really looks from the outside. How temporary it all is. I stood on the porch, papers in hand, waiting for the new owner to arrive. It was closing day. 6 months after Dolores and Bryce had been removed. 6 months of quiet mornings, yoga sunrises, drawing, and court hearings. 6 months of slow, steady freedom. The civil suit had wrapped up 2 weeks earlier. Camille had called me with a rare grin in her voice. "We got it all, Lena. Every dime. The judge ruled in your favor. Dolores is on the hook. And Bryce didn't even show up." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sound felt good in my throat. Dolores tried to play the victim, of course. She showed up in court with some borrowed walker and a sob story about misunderstanding financial agreements. But Camille wasn't having any of it. She handed the judge the bruised rib photos, the voice messages, and every line item of the $22,000 they owed me. The court didn't just rule in my favor. They made it clear, I had been used. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. Like the scales had finally tipped back to where they belonged. Bryce never responded to the summons. Not once. Camille said it was likely he moved out of state, maybe shacked up with some new poor woman. His silence wasn't surprising. It was just more of the same cowardice wrapped in a different bow. And honestly, I was grateful for the quiet. The money came through faster than expected. Enough to settle debts, pad a savings account, and buy myself something I'd dreamed about for years, a sunny, one-bedroom apartment near the waterfront. It wasn't flashy. But it had hardwood floors, windows that caught the golden hour just right, and a little balcony with room for a table, 2 chairs, and a pot of lavender. I filled it with light. With soft fabrics and open space. With bowls of fresh fruit on the counter and flowers I bought for no reason other than, they made me smile. I slept with the windows cracked open and a fan humming low beside me. For the first time in a decade, I slept without a nightlight. I still woke up early, but now it was to walk by the water. No rushing. No errands for someone else. Just my own breath, my own rhythm. Sometimes I brought my sketchbook. Sometimes I just sat on a bench and listened to the waves. Friends started saying I looked different. "You're glowing," Celia said one afternoon over iced tea. "Seriously. I've never seen you like this." "I think I'm finally me," I told her. She raised her glass to that. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Bryce to suffer or Dolores to grovel. I needed closure. And I got it. As the real estate agent pulled up in his SUV, I turned and looked at the house one last time. The paint was fresh. The lawn trimmed. You'd never guess what had happened inside those walls. The buyer, a woman named Tara, stepped out of the passenger side and walked up the path with a warm smile. She was in her early 30s, newly married, full of plans and Pinterest boards. I liked her instantly. "This place is beautiful," she said, looking around. "You took really good care of it." I nodded. "It has a lot of history." Tara didn't ask what kind. She didn't need to know. We shook hands, exchanged papers. She was excited. I was calm. When it was done, she turned to me and said, "Thank you." I handed her the keys. "Take care of it," I said softly. "It's seen a lot." And as I walked down the path toward my car, I whispered a promise under my breath. Never again. Not to toxic love. Not to giving until I had nothing left. Not to mistaking obligation for family. That chapter was closed. My life was mine now. And it was just beginning.